Okay, this is the second podcast. I don't know if I left a picture of me in that first podcast. I may have. Generally, I won't. It's not because I'm ashamed of how I look. I just think it's a little bit distracting. I could be wrong about that, but I just think the human voice does pretty much everything I need it to do. So, but sometimes I might forget. Okay, so I've talked about that we've gone from a hybrid to fully online for at least the first 3 weeks. I want to talk about the readings now. Um, as I said in my email, the all the readings should be online. So, or I'm sorry, on reserve in the library. Let me repeat that. They're on reserve in the library. So if the book's just a little bit expensive for you, what you can do is you can just go check it out for 2 hours and read it and prepare yourself. It's a 2 hour reserve. Now the forget the Alamo. It should be on reserve now. If not, it'll be on reserve in the next week or so, which is okay. It syncs up with the when we begin reading from that book, and I'll stay on top of that to make sure it's on reserve for students that would like to choose that option. So the first book, or one of the first books we're going to read, is called "Forget the Alamo." It's a very interesting book. It's a very controversial book, which is why I signed it. It's kind of a new history of the Alamo. It's a history that synthesizes a lot of the historical understanding of the Alamo that has been unearthed in probably the last 2 decades. And some of that's very, very controversial. For instance, did Davy Crockett die the day of the Alamo? Was he executed the next day? There's no doubt he died at the Alamo. The question is, did he die the day of the battle, or was he executed the next day? One of the things that we now understand is that Tejanos, Mexican Texans, fought with the Texas revolutionaries against Santa Anna. Something like 9 Tejanos died at the Alamo, which was when I was a student, wasn't really something that was talked about very much. Juan Seguin, Seguin, the city of Seguin is named after him. He came from a very, very distinguished San Antonio family. The only reason he didn't die at the Alamo is that William Barrett Travis asked him to leave the Alamo to bring reinforcements. Seguin did his best, but ultimately no reinforcements arrived. And above all, the hot question in 2021 is the question about the Texas Revolution and the role of slavery in the Texas Revolution. Very controversial question, very hot. In K through 12 now, you're not even really even supposed to talk about it because it might upset students. Well, I think you're grown up. I think you can talk about it. I'm not going to tell you what to think. I'm going to present evidence, and hopefully we'll be in class and we can talk about these issues among ourselves, which is always really the best way to approach the past, to be able to talk about it instead of hiding from it. And I think you can take it. But if you think that any discussions about slavery, and there's no doubt slavery did exist in Texas, might trigger you or upset you, you should probably drop this class and take another Texas history class. Although I have to say, probably every Texas history class being taught will talk about slavery in some form or fashion. Just a quick fact, by 1860, one out of every 3 Texans was a slave. About 200,000 Texans out of 600,000, 200,000 were slaves. So it's kind of hard to talk about Texas before the Civil War without talking about slavery. And we are. So it should be an interesting discussion. There's a much better understanding of the Texas Revolution. And I just think most of you will find it fascinating. I don't have an axe to grind in this. I just want to present to you what the evidence shows, what the counter evidence shows, and let's just see if we can be adults and face the past like adults, and not be afraid to face our past, because it's kind of hard to move forward if you can't face the past. Okay, the other book we're going to read is Tomlinson Hill, and that's another book on that has to do with the African American experience in Texas. And Tomlinson, he um, he was raised near Waco on Tomlinson Hill, and there was an African American family there, and the most famous member of that family is Ladanian Tomlinson, who was the great running back at TCU, and then he went on to have, I think, maybe a Hall of Fame career at the with the Chargers. I'm not sure he made the Hall of Fame or not, but he really had a stellar career. And so Thompson, Chris Thompson, who wrote the book, he's white, and he writes about the experience of African Americans in this area, Marlin County, I think, near the Waco area. It's a very, very interesting book, and the football player Tomlinson actually writes the foreword to the book. So, and then the third book that we're going to read is called Empire of the Summer Moon, and that's a history of the Comanche in Texas. And I want to read that because the Comanches dominated Texas from about the 1720s really into the 1850s. And they weren't completely driven out of Texas until the 1880s. You had a very, very fierce war between the Comanche and Anglo settlers from about the 1850s to the 1880s, when the Comanche were finally defeated by the US Army and driven into Oklahoma. So the Comanche play a big, big role in the history of Texas that we are studying, beginning in the Spanish period into the Mexican period, and well into the Anglo and African American period. I'm going to ask you to rent a movie called The Searchers, which you can rent. I think you can actually rent it for $2.99, but you definitely can rent it for $3.99. It's also on a DVD in the library that you can check out, which is on reserve. And that's a movie from the 50s. It's a pretty amazing movie. And it's about an Anglo girl that's kidnapped by Comanche, and her uncle John Wayne searches for her. And you don't know if John Wayne wants to kill her because she's become Comanche, or he wants to save her. It's really a fantastic movie. It's considered one of the top 15 movies, American movies ever made. It's also quite beautiful. It's filmed in Utah. It takes place in Texas, but it's filmed in Utah. So we'll watch that later in the semester. Also, over the course of the semester, I will post readings on Blackboard Learn that the whole class can access. And this way you don't have to, pay any more money than necessary for the books. My son just graduated from college a couple of years ago. I have another child entering college next year. I know all about books and how much they cost. I'm trying to save you money where I can, especially by putting books on reserve. If you have any issues with the books, again, just get in touch with me. As I've said before, and I'll say it many other times, I'm a big believer in repetition, by the way. I can't help you if I don't know what the challenges are that you're facing. But if I do know the challenges, the chances are pretty good, at least in this class anyway, I can give you a hand. Okay, I'm going to stop this podcast and then start another one.